Welcome to Red, White, and Blue. From the right, I'm Gary Polland.
And from the left, I'm David Jones.
Tonight we welcome two interesting guests. First, Linda Geffin, Chief of Special Prosecution for the Harris County Attorney's Office. And David, Linda will tell us what that means. And David Michael Ryan, who's an attorney in Houston. And David, we're going to hear about your interesting law practice.
So let's start. You're the government person here. Why don't you tell us what this is all about with your career first, that you are now in a position to be trying to stamp out human trafficking?
Well, as a government person, I work for County Attorney Vince Ryan, and when Vince came into office, he saw a great need to fulfill his mission of neighborhood improvement. And towards that end, he created the Special Prosecutions Unit. We do many things, including fighting for animal rights, against dogfighting, cockfighting. We go against noxious nightclubs. But primarily what we've been focusing on lately, because of the huge need for it, is human trafficking. And we work very closely with law enforcement to help eradicate and close down the businesses that harbor that criminal element. And before, I've been 10 years with the County Attorney's Office and 10 years with the DA's office before that, so I've been with local government for quite some time.
20-year veteran, Mr. Ryan. That's who your opposition is today. So how did you come into this world of seeing this? I'm sure you're not here to represent an industry.
My story is that I took the oath of citizenship when I was 14 years old to become an American citizen. As a result, I have a little bit more of an affinity and empathy for what the non-native born American or resident of the United States has to go through. As a result, my practice is mainly the immigrant community, although I don't do a lot of immigration work. I do some, but most of what I do is represent immigrants in state court. Criminal cases, divorces, business disputes, purchasing businesses, things of that nature.
This includes prostitution, does it not?
Well, prostitution is a large part of the criminal defense I do. A large segment of my client base is the Asian community. The Asian community makes up less than 10% of the population, but they make up over 50% of the prostitution arrests. Because I'm one of the few attorneys that are willing to fight the prostitution cases in criminal court, and I understand that a prostitution conviction can get a woman immediately deported, and most other attorneys don't take that into consideration, a lot of them will come to me.
Well, Linda, let's first talk about what the topic is, human trafficking. When I hear of human trafficking, of course, I think of the movie Taken, because I do, because that was a movie about abduction of, in this case, American girls, and to be put into slavery in Saudi Arabia, was it? What are we really talking about?
Well, I mean, the movie Taken is a bit exaggerated, but human trafficking is the fastest growing criminal enterprise, second only to guns and drugs. However, it's soon climbing up because the folks who run the drug cartels find that trafficking is so profitable that they're switching into the buying and selling of humans. Human trafficking is actually the recruitment, the harboring, the obtaining of a human being through force, coercion, duress, or some other means such as that for the purpose of indentured servitude, labor, slavery, or the commercial sex slave industry. It is a huge problem in the United States, globally in Harris County. It's a $32 billion industry, which is higher than the gross national product of some countries, higher than Walmart's profit, to give you a perspective on the kind of money it brings in. And here in Harris County, to bring it close to home, in Harris County we have approximately 6,000 runaways every year. Within 72 hours, approximately 2,000 of them will be caught up in the commercial sex slave trade. In Harris County is a hub for trafficking, and that's due to geographic reasons, but it's like the perfect storm. We have two major airports, we have a railroad, we have the ship channel, and we have a very porous border. All of those factors conspire to make Harris County not just a hub, but it's a destination city. We actually have training brothels in Houston where women and girls are brought in to be trained in how to use the the industry, how to be used in the industry, and they're shipped out to other big cities. The Department of Justice has certified I-10 as a corridor for human trafficking.
So do you basically, what you do in your practice is use the civil courts to go after the people who are behind human trafficking?
Yes, Gary, that's right. We use the power of civil injunctions to target the locations that harbor the criminal element. In other words, they harbor the pimps, they harbor the business person who is giving safe haven to the people who are in control, to the traffickers. So we work with law enforcement. If citizens give us a tip, we'll develop those leads, and we do the investigation to learn about the location and ultimately close that location, work with the nonprofits so that the victims, when the location is closed, have a safe place to fall. The nonprofits like Houston Rescue and Restore, International YMCA.
How effective are these strategies, Mr. Ryan, do you think?
They're not. No one is going to try and say that human trafficking is not a terrible thing, and I've said it before, there's a special place in hell for people that make a living off of buying and selling other human beings. But the problems of human trafficking are multi-dimensional. Going in after a small businessman that you think might be involved in something is not going to solve the problem. In fact, all you're going to do is drive it deeper underground if he's actually involved. The fact of the matter is most of the businesses that get targeted are not involved in that kind of activity. They are simply businesses trying to make a living. If the police did a better job of their investigations, you wouldn't have Houston being a destination city if in fact it is.
So we're not putting you're saying we're not applying the resources correctly, do you think?
Well, the problem becomes this. They look at the picture and they say, I'm going after this business, I'm going to shut it down, and this is going to cure the problem. It doesn't cure the problem. Part of their strategy, the government strategy, is to try and make as many prostitution cases in one of these businesses as they can. Why not use, for example, the U visa through the Immigration and Naturalization Service, the Immigration and Customs Enforcement Service? The U visa is especially for victims of human trafficking. All they need is somebody from law enforcement to say, this is a victim, and they can have permission to stay. They don't use it. They don't even attempt to do it. In fact, most vice officers I've had to deal with have said, I don't care, I got to get the case first. I need that conviction.
I'm not exactly sure who the you is and the they are that you're referring to, because here in this county, from the federal level all the way down to the local level, in the mid-2000s, our Attorney General, through the latest legislative session back then, mandated a human trafficking report, which mandated a task force. The U.S. Attorney's Office does a wonderful job, as does FBI and ICE, coming together along with the Harris County Task Force, which is made up of nonprofits and police officers on the ground. And the locations that I have seen and that we have targeted are thoroughly investigated, thoroughly researched, and we know the criminal history of the business owner and that they have been arrested for, it could be anything from having a location that doesn't have a massage parlor license, which they're required to do. And you have to admit, if you drive down 1960, which has a very large Asian population of spas, one after another, that these are not licensed facilities. The other thing that the government is doing correctly and appropriately is there's a huge movement in the trafficking industry to decriminalize these victims. There are certainly prostitutes out there, and there's certainly victims. Now, the victims, the people who are being trafficked, are these folks who are coming across the border. They're being promised better jobs. They simply want to send money home to their family, to their kids. They get ensnared in trafficking, and the first thing that happens, their passport is taken, they're beaten, they're raped, they may be gang raped, they're threatened, their families are threatened, and then once they are broken down, they're sent into these brothels, into the massage parlors. In 1960, the cantinas in the southeast part of the county, and they are put out in all places of the county, sent out into other locations with law enforcement doing the investigations and targeting not the women, not the girls, but the people who are running them, their pimps.
Yeah, so who represents the pimps, David, since you've been representing the girls?
I don't know, because if I have represented in 18 years of practice probably 3 people charged with some element of human trafficking. I don't like those people. I charge them a great deal of money to represent them. I've been successful in my representation of them because the government is not doing what they claim they're doing. This is great for headlines, this is great for publicity, because there's not a one of us here that is going to sit there and say it's great that these people are being brought here under false pretenses and then forced into something that they had not bargained for. However, the fact is they are not proving these cases. The fact is that they are not getting the cooperation they need because they are not trying to decriminalize things. 5 years ago, the Harris County District Attorney's Office was willing to make a prostitution charge on a first offense a Class C misdemeanor of disorderly conduct. You can't get that anymore. You cannot get a pretrial diversion for a prostitute in Harris County anymore, even if there's a suspicion that she's been human trafficked.
So we're abusing the victims twice.
Absolutely.
We're allowing the businesses to lure them across the border, primarily because of our immigration policies, which Gary and his party are responsible for.
No, as a member of Gary's party, I would disagree with some of that.
When you tighten up the border and you make it more difficult for those folks south of the border, and let's not fool ourselves, this is not just Asians that are being forced into this lifestyle. These are people from Mexico and Central America as well. We're making trafficking very. It's become a very attractive job for the smugglers because of our controlling of the border.
There are African women and children.
For lack of control of the border, that's why it happens, David.
Mm-hmm. There are African women and children being bought and sold within 5 miles of this building, okay? And it's been going on for years. Law enforcement has done nothing to try and shut it down. Now, there are some practical problems for law enforcement, especially in the immigrant communities where they are not trusting of people from the outside. So it's hard for law enforcement to crack that kind of business.
Well, the fact is, slavery was never abolished. Although we think that in 1865 that slavery was abolished, there are more slaves now globally than there were in the whole 400 years of the African slave trade. It's not just Asians, it's not just Afro-Americans, it's every ethnicity, it's every socioeconomic group, it's in River Oaks, it's in Bel Air, it's labor trafficking, it's the commercial sex slave trade. But I think what we need to really concentrate on distinguishing, we're not talking about prostitution per se. When I'm talking about especially when I'm talking about human trafficking, there are very willing women who will go and become prostitutes, and I'm glad there are good lawyers like you out there to defend them. I'm talking about representing the victims and making sure that the women and the girls, the underage minors, I had a 14-year-old, and that's not unusual, who get ensnared in this get out of it as quickly as possible by using all of the governmental agencies in place. It's not a perfect system. If we didn't have such budget constraints, we would have more people on the ground from every agency.
Why don't you do something about the little boys being trafficked in the Montrose?
We do.
No, you don't.
Well, Harris County Juvenile Services does. I can't say we do for every single little boy, but if you have some names, we will investigate it.
Well, the State Department, Mr. Ryan, says that this, in their report that I read, that this is a problem mostly because Linda brings up the global dimensions of this, Congo, North Korea, Saudi Arabia, and Iran. I mean, what exactly are we supposed to do about that?
Well,
not buy certain products. How do we do it?
Well, that is a very important point, because while we're talking about human trafficking here in the county, it is a global problem, and a lot of people, particularly your viewers, are going to wonder what they can do to help. A couple of things that I think bears repeating. First of all, if you suspect trafficking, there is a national reporting line. It's 888-3737-888. But it's also important for us, sitting here at this table right now, to become aware of slavery in our products. It's in our coffee, it's in our chocolate, it's in our clothing, it's in our computers. The only way slavery and human trafficking is going to change, it's when people stop saying, what, they're still slaves, and recognize that it is of epidemic proportions, raise awareness, and realize that until you become aware of the problem, you're contributing to it. And
I'll get
stop
back to
buying
your original question, which
slave-free
was about
coffee.
Specific countries overseas that are engaged in this. Your problem with the North Koreans. Your problem with the North Koreans is those people are desperate to get out of that country. The Russians send them right back if they cross the Russian borders. The Chinese send them right back if they cross the borders. So they actually have to get all the way down to Thailand or somewhere like that before they can then get to South Korea or somewhere else in order to be safe. The United States government, if they wanted to help those people, would do something by putting pressure on those governments not to send those people back immediately, to do things to help the non-government organizations that try to help victims of human trafficking, when they get to safe haven countries, get out of where they're at. One of the points that was brought up earlier, and unfortunately, we're taking this, as you said earlier, mostly on the prostitution. There's a lot of indentured servitude that goes on as well. Frequently, people that are approaching a coyote or a snakehead in the Asian community to get here think they're paying one price, and then when they get here, they find out, no, that was only the down payment. You owe more. So now you're going to go work in these fields. You're going to go work in these restaurants. You're going to be a housemaid, as well as forced to be mules for drugs and things of that nature. This is another form of the slavery that's going on. And
is this happening because our immigration policy is a mess? Is that part of it?
That's part of it, but it's not all of it. Right. Greed ultimately drives it. You've got people that are, whether or not people want to hear this, and it sounds corny, people still look at the lady who holds the torch. As I heard one immigrant say, I always wanted to see the lady holding the torch. We still stand for freedom. We still stand for liberty. That's why people want to come here. And people are desperate to get out of their own situations.
We stand for that, but we don't stand for it if you're just an ordinary worker, ordinary wage earner, because we have no protections for people in the workplace in this country.
That's another show,
we have no unions that can provide some sort of resistance to sort of the globalization of these products.
You don't have to answer that question.
We have no monitoring. We have no monitoring and regulation.
With respect,
of the workplace.
unions are part of the problem.
Well, and that is true. We do have products coming across from even places we can't pronounce, these small, tiny islands that we own that are produced in sweatshops. But the real crux of the problem is supply and demand.
Islands? Did you say?
Yes, there are some little tiny
Marianas.
Yes, yes.
Tom DeLay's favorite
Gary,
vacation place. Yeah, that's right.
But the whole crux of the problem is as ancient as any problem, and that's supply and demand. If you cut off the demand for cheap labor in the homes where everybody wants to have a housekeeper and pay $35 a week, or if you cut off the demand for the commercial sex slave trade, which is a huge problem, and maybe it needs to be regulated, maybe willing prostitutes can become regulated, but at least we can get out the folks who are being trafficked into it. But we also need to raise awareness so the people who are buying the commodity, the human being, does not think it's okay. We do have a huge immigrant population, and a lot of people come across the border and they leave their families behind, they leave their wives behind, and somehow they think it's okay to go buy a woman for a night.
So
and
the demand is a big problem. I want to ask you, Linda, about this. I thought it was fascinating. This week's Houston Press has an article that was done by Village Voice Publications, which is what Houston Press is a part of, which is an older New York newspaper, but basically a giveaway paper. And it's all about sex trade and human trafficking, and talked about minors, because there's allegations made, I don't know where, that 100 to 300,000 children each year are basically abducted and put into prostitution in America. And their survey said 827 arrests in the country were for underage prostitution, which shows that the problem is not nearly that big. I think the more interesting question for you is, why would Village Voice run an article in every newspaper they have, giveaway newspaper they have in the country, about this subject, to try to debunk the idea that human trafficking is a problem for juveniles? What's driving this?
I don't know. Maybe because their back page advertises
massage parlors,
and it's kind of a feel-good piece, although I'm sure, I think the Village Voice is a fine paper, and I think the Houston Press is a fine paper, and they do a lot of pieces of good investigative journalism. But the commercial sex slave industry for children is huge. We had a case here in Texas 2 years ago, you're probably familiar with it, the case of the juvenile female who was 13. She was a runaway, and she was picked up by a police officer after agreeing to engage in a commercial sex act, and she was arrested, as a juvenile can be under the juvenile code for any offense in the penal code. So she was arrested for prostitution. Went all the way up to the Supreme Court. A very fine lawyer by the name of Ann Johnson handled that case, and it was reversed because a 13-year-old cannot agree to engage in prostitution. So perhaps the Village Voice is bringing light onto the darkness of having kids out there in Montrose selling their bodies, because more often than not they've come from abusive homes, and try as we may, the system does need to perhaps. It may be an impossibility because a lot of kids come from abusive homes. Kids don't grow up and say, I want to be a prostitute. I want to hang out in Montrose and get picked up. So we need to address that problem as well. We need to address the problem of the men who pick up these children to engage in these acts.
Female children.
And boys.
For the most part.
Girls and boys.
But isn't it mostly, we're exploiting women in this culture all over the place. I mean, you just have to look at the last...
Yes, but girls and boys as kids, juveniles, boys in Montrose is a big problem. And I think it's good that they're shedding light on this problem.
I think what the Village Voice is trying to tell you is that for all the sizzle and pop that the government wants to give you about how massive this problem is, it's really not that massive a problem.
You know, I just got to say that when you say something like sizzle and pop when human lives are at stake, I think it disparages the trafficking movement because, I need to finish my sentence, because it's not sizzle and pop. It's based on fact. When women are being raped every night, children are being raped every night, and it is a real significant problem. When you say it's
women and children will be raped every night, whether they're illegally trafficked or not.
Publicity and sizzle and pop, it disparages all of the efforts of law enforcement from the U.S. government.
Well, you'd admit that 100,000 people is what the CNN site says is sort of the population of trafficked individuals in the United States. We're a country of 300 million. I mean, this is, how big is this?
Conservative estimates say that there are 12 million people being trafficked into the United States every year, but the estimate is more likely 12 to 18 million. That's not sizzle and pop. That's a big number of people.
I think you disparage the true victims of human trafficking when you try and exploit their situation by pumping up numbers, by waging a phony baloney war, as phony as the war on drugs is, on trying to resolve this problem, when instead of seeking real solutions for these people, the real victims of them, rather than the government trying to re-victimize them.
What's your solution? The market?
Start using
you said you're in Gary's party.
Using the goodwill of the United States government to bring pressure on third world countries to do something more about what's happening in their own homelands.
Well, we can do a whole lot with Saudi Arabia, Iran, Congo, and North Korea.
Saudi Arabia doesn't even let in certain nationalities. That's a whole other issue. We're not going to be able to negotiate with Saudi Arabia or North Korea. And I think rather than focusing on, and I can understand you having a particular bent that way, becoming a citizen when you were 14, but if we try to solve this problem first right here in this room by raising awareness, and then outside this door in the city of Houston, and then in Harris County, we can go a long way towards eliminating any illusion of sizzle and pop, working on the real problem, and helping victims of a very real crime.
I have no problem with raising awareness. I have a real problem when it is being manufactured with false numbers. I have a real problem when the true victims, when they are identified, are instead re-victimized by the system and put in a criminal justice system they should not be in. You have people that are.
So we should legalize. We should legalize the Sweden. They punish the purchaser of the product, not the seller.
Well, for example, and I'm not advocating this, most of the world has very different laws concerning prostitution than the United States does. For example, the nation of Costa Rica, prostitution is perfectly legal. However, pimping is mandatory prison time, not jail time, prison time.
Well, maybe that's the next step here, but for the time being, I think we are doing as much as we possibly can in the short time we've had laws on the books. And as a matter of fact, while Houston and Texas may have one of the most severe problems, we are one of the most forward-thinking
are we
states.
making progress?
We are making progress. Just this last legislative session, and Governor Perry signed in some very important bills that were put forth by State Representative Sanfronia Thompson and Senator Vanderpute. Extremely important legislation that tightens the penalties for traffickers, makes it that they have to register as a sex offender if they're convicted of trafficking, makes a repeat offender eligible to up to a life sentence. So
Texas penal system, that's the answer. We enlarge it. Right, David?
I don't think more laws are the problem. I don't think more laws are the solution. I think better use of the resources we have, targeting them towards identifying the victims and then assisting those victims who really are victims is the way to go.
That.
Okay. I don't think throwing more money at phony baloney investigations because somebody decided they didn't like the place their neighbor is going to get a massage is the solution.
All I have to ask you to do, David, is watch out where you buy your coffee. Thanks for being here, everyone. We invite you to visit our home online at HoustonPBS.org. Click on the local program bar at Red, White, and Blue. Read about our guests. Watch the shows. A follow-up discussion with these guys. Until next time, get informed and get active.